Detective Sofia Alvarez stared at the crime scene photos spread across her desk, the harsh fluorescent lights of the Boston Police Department's homicide unit making the images even more stark. It was the fourth victim in 3 months, and just like the others, there wasn't a single piece of forensic evidence left behind. No fingerprints, no DNA, no fibers, nothing. The press had already dubbed the killer the Ghost, and the name was fitting. "You still think these are connected?" Detective Mike Donovan leaned against her desk, coffee in hand, skepticism etched across his weathered face. Sophia looked up, her dark eyes intense. 4 victims, all killed between midnight and 4 a.m., all with the same precise incision to the carotid artery, and all with that same symbol carved into their palm. Yeah, I'd say they're connected. The symbol, a complex design that resembled an old maritime compass with peculiar modifications, had become the killer's signature. Each victim had it carved post-mortem into their right palm, a meticulous detail that haunted Sophia's dreams. Boston in the late 90s was still a city in transition. The Central Artery Project had torn open the downtown, creating a maze of detours and construction zones. Crime rates were falling, but the city's old neighborhoods still harbored dark corners and forgotten spaces, perfect hunting grounds for someone who knew how to disappear. "Captain wants an update by end of day," Donovan said, walking away, "and he's not happy about the press coverage." Sophia nodded, turning back to the evidence board she'd constructed. 4 victims with seemingly nothing in common: a college professor, a nurse, a construction worker, and a retired accountant. Different ages, different backgrounds, different neighborhoods. The only connection was the method of their deaths, and that strange symbol. She picked up the latest forensic report, scanning it for anything they might have missed. The killer was methodical, almost surgical in his approach. No sign of struggle, suggesting the victims knew their killer or were taken completely by surprise. The medical examiner had noted that the precision of the wounds indicated someone with medical knowledge or extensive practice. Sophia's phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. "Detective Alvarez," she answered, her voice clipped. "Sophia, it's Dan from Records. I found something that might interest you." 20 minutes later, Sophia was in the basement archives, surrounded by dusty boxes. "It's not an exact match," Dan said, pushing his glasses up his nose, "but it's similar. A series of murders in '82 never solved. The victims had a symbol carved into their hands, though not the same one." Sophia flipped through the yellowed case files, her heart racing. The symbol from the 1982 killings was different, but had elements that echoed the current one, concentric circles with radiating lines. "Who was the lead detective?" she asked. "James Hargrove, retired about 10 years ago." Sophia checked her watch. "You have an address." The rain had started by the time Sophia pulled up to the modest suburban home in Quincy. The neighborhood was quiet, tree-lined streets with well-maintained houses that all looked vaguely similar. James Hargrove was in his late 60s, with thinning white hair and eyes that still held the sharp gaze of a detective. He invited Sophia in without surprise, as if he'd been expecting her. "I figured someone would come knocking eventually," he said, leading her to a small study filled with books and old photographs. "When I saw the news about the ghost, I knew it was starting again." "You think it's the same killer?" Sophia asked, taking the seat he offered. Hargrove shook his head. "Not the same person, no. That would make our killer at least in their 60s now. But the same pattern." "What do you mean?" "The killings in '82 stopped abruptly after the 6th victim. No explanation, no arrests, they just stopped. We never figured out why." He pulled out an old folder from his desk. "I kept copies of everything. Against department policy, of course, but this case never let me go." Sophia leaned forward. "What happened to the original killer?" "That's the thing, Detective Alvarez. I think he died. A John Doe was found in the harbor 3 days after the last killing. Badly decomposed, but the timing always felt significant to me." "And you think someone's copying him now? How? These cases were before digital records, and I didn't find any connection in our database." Hargrove's eyes darkened. That's what's been keeping me up at night. Someone knew enough details to resurrect this nightmare. The question is, who had access to that information? As Sophia drove back to the precinct, her mind raced with possibilities. If Hargrove was right, they weren't just looking for a killer. They were looking for someone with a connection to a decades-old case, someone who had gone to great lengths to recreate a series of murders that had faded from public memory. Her phone rang again. It was the captain. "Alvarez, we've got another body, and this time he left something behind." The fifth victim was discovered in an abandoned warehouse near the harbor, the smell of salt water mixing with the metallic scent of blood. Unlike the previous scenes, this one was different, messier, more personal. The victim, a middle-aged man named Thomas Reeves, lay sprawled across the concrete floor, the same precise cut to the carotid, the same symbol carved into his palm, but this time there was more. Words written in blood on the wall behind him. "You're looking in the wrong place." "He's talking to us now," said Donovan, standing beside Sophia as the crime scene techs photographed every inch of the warehouse. "Or to you, specifically." Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. "What makes you think it's directed at me?" Donovan handed her an evidence bag containing a police badge, her old badge from when she'd first joined the force before her promotion to detective. She'd lost it years ago during a foot chase that had ended badly, the same case that still haunted her, where her misjudgment had resulted in the death of a young woman. "Where was this found?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "In the victim's mouth." Captain Reynolds pulled her aside as soon as she returned to the precinct. His office was a glass-walled space that offered the illusion of privacy without the reality of it. "You're off the case, Alvarez," he said without preamble. Sophia stood rigid. "Sir, with all due respect, this isn't a debate. The killer has made it personal. He's targeting you specifically, which means you're compromised. Or it means I'm getting close to something." Reynolds sighed, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Sophia, this isn't just about department protocol. I'm worried about your safety. This killer has shown he knows details about you, about your past." Sophia leaned forward, placing her hands on his desk. "Which is exactly why I need to stay on this case. No one else has the context I do. No one else has spoken to Hargrove about the 82 killings." "Hargrove? James Hargrove?" Reynolds looked surprised. "You spoke to him?" "Yes, this afternoon. There are similarities between our ghost and a series of unsolved murders from 1982. Hargrove was the lead detective." Reynolds was quiet for a moment, something unreadable passing across his face. "I knew Jim back then. Good detective. Obsessive, though. He thinks our killer might be copying the original. That's a theory, not evidence." Reynolds rubbed his temple. "Look, you can consult on the case, but Donovan takes the lead, and I want you to have protection. This guy knows who you are, where you work. He could know where you live." Sophia wanted to argue, but knew it would be futile. "Fine, but I want access to everything, all the evidence, all the interviews." "Done. Now go home, get some rest. You look like hell." Sophia couldn't go home. Not yet. Instead, she drove to the public library, which had recently digitized its newspaper archives. If Hargrove was right about the connection to the 82 killings, there might be something in the press coverage that could help. The library was nearly empty at this hour, just a few students scattered among the tables, and an elderly librarian who looked like she'd been there since the building was constructed. Sophia found what she was looking for in the microfilm section, every article about the 1982 murders. As she scrolled through the grainy images, a pattern began to emerge. The original killer had been methodical too, but there was something else. Each victim had been found with an object that belonged to the next victim, a subtle clue that had only been recognized in retrospect. She printed several articles and was about to leave when something caught her eye, a small photograph accompanying one of the later pieces. It showed the detective team working the case. Hargrove was there, younger but recognizable. And beside him, a much younger version of Captain Reynolds. Sophia stared at the image, her mind racing. Reynolds had never mentioned being involved in the original investigation. Why would he hide that connection? As she left the library, the feeling of being watched prickled at the back of her neck. The street was dark, pools of light from the street lamps creating more shadows than illumination. She quickened her pace, one hand resting on her service weapon. The attack came from behind, a cloth pressed over her mouth, the sweet smell of chloroform filling her nostrils. She tried to fight, to reach for her gun, but the world was already spinning, darkness closing in from the edges. Her last conscious thought was the realization that the ghost had found her first. Sophia awoke to the smell of damp concrete and rust. Her head throbbed, vision blurry as she tried to orient herself. She was seated in a metal chair, hands bound behind her with what felt like zip ties. The room was dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, creating long shadows that danced across the walls. "Detective Alvarez," a voice said from somewhere in the darkness. "I was beginning to think I'd used too much chloroform." Sophia squinted, trying to make out the figure standing just beyond the circle of light. "Why don't you step into the light? Let me see the face of the ghost." A soft chuckle echoed through the space. "Names have power, Detective. The media chose the ghost, not me. I prefer to think of myself as a historian." The figure moved closer, but still remained partially obscured. Sophia could make out only the silhouette of a man of average height and build, nothing distinctive enough to form a clear description. "Is that what you call yourself, a historian?" "You're a killer," Sophia said, testing the strength of her restraints. They were tight, cutting into her wrists. "I'm preserving something important, something that would otherwise be forgotten." The man moved to a table just visible at the edge of the light. On it lay several items, newspaper clippings, photographs, and what looked like case files. "Do you know what connects all the victims, Detective?" Sophia's mind raced, thinking of the hours she'd spent trying to find a pattern. "Enlighten me." "They all played a part in erasing history, in burying the truth." He picked up one of the photographs and moved closer, finally stepping into the light. Sophia's breath caught. The man before her was ordinary, medium build, brown hair graying at the temples, eyes that might have been kind in another context. He wore a button-down shirt and slacks, like an office worker or a teacher, not the monster she had imagined. "Thomas Keller," she said, recognition dawning. "You worked in the records department at City Hall. You processed my request for the archived case files from the 80s last month." He smiled, seeming pleased that she remembered. "Very good, Detective. Yes, I've spent 20 years in that basement, watching as important histories were boxed away, reclassified, forgotten, including the truth about the Harbor Killer in 1982. "The Harbor Killer? Is that what you call the original murderer?" Keller's expression darkened. "That's what he was called, before the department decided to bury the case. Before certain officers decided their careers were more important than justice." He placed the photograph in front of her. It showed a young woman, perhaps college-aged, smiling at the camera. "My sister, Andrea, the Harbor Killer's final victim, or at least that's what the official record states." Sophia studied the photograph, making connections rapidly. She wasn't the final victim. The John Doe found in the harbor was not the killer, Keller finished for her. He was another victim, but the department was under pressure to close the case. The city was in panic. Tourism was suffering, so they created a convenient narrative. The killer was dead. Case closed. "And you believe the real killer is still out there?" Keller laughed, a bitter sound. "No, Detective, the real killer has been dead for years. But those who protected him, who buried the truth, they're still very much alive. Or they were, until I started my work." Sophia's mind flashed to the crime scene photos, to the victims who had seemed so random. Your victims, they were connected to the original investigation. Each one played a role in the cover-up. Professor Lawrence Adams wrote the psychological profile that led the investigation away from the actual killer. Nurse Elizabeth Chen altered medical records at the request of detectives. Construction worker Roberto Diaz was a key witness who changed his testimony, and retired accountant Harold Murphy helped funnel money to silence other witnesses. Sophia thought of the fifth victim, Thomas Reeves. And Reeves, former beat cop who lost crucial evidence. Keller moved back to the table, picking up another photograph. But they were just following orders, weren't they? The real architects of the cover-up were higher up the chain. A cold realization washed over Sophia. Captain Reynolds. Keller nodded, his eyes gleaming with a fervent light. And James Hargrove, the dynamic duo who sacrificed justice for their careers. Hargrove couldn't live with his conscience, became obsessed with the case even after retirement. Reynolds, on the other hand, thrived, rose through the ranks. "Why me?" Sophia asked. "Why involve me in this?" "Because you understand obsession, Detective Alvarez. You've never forgiven yourself for Lisa Mendez." The name hit Sophia like a physical blow. Lisa Mendez, the young woman who had died 3 years ago because Sophia had misread a situation, had moved in too quickly during a hostage negotiation. "I've read your file," Keller continued. "You hunt killers with the same desperation that haunts me. We're not so different." "I don't murder people," Sophia said, her voice hard. "No, but you understand the need for justice at any cost. And you're going to help me get it." "Why would I help you?" Keller smiled, and this time there was something truly frightening in his eyes. "Because Captain Reynolds isn't the only one who buried evidence. There were others in the department, officers who are still serving, including your partner, Detective Donovan." Sophia felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. "That's not possible. Donovan would have been barely out of the academy in '82. Family connections run deep in the Boston PD detective. Donovan's father was Reynolds' partner before Hargrove. The cover-up was a family affair." Keller moved toward the door. "I'm going to leave you with this information. Consider it carefully. You're just going to leave me here? The zip ties aren't that tight. A resourceful detective like you should be free in, 20 minutes or so." He paused at the door. "By then, I'll be having a conversation with Captain Reynolds. Whether he survives that conversation depends on what you decide to do with what I've told you." As the door closed behind him, Sophia immediately began working on her restraints. Her service weapon was gone, but they'd overlooked the small knife she kept in her boot, a precaution she'd taken ever since a close call early in her career. It took her 15 minutes to get free, and another 5 to determine she was in an abandoned maintenance room in the subway system. Her phone was gone, but she still had her badge. As she emerged onto the street, Sophia was faced with an impossible choice. If Keller was telling the truth, her entire department was built on a foundation of corruption and cover-ups. If he was lying, her captain's life was in imminent danger. Either way, she was running out of time. The rain had intensified by the time Sophia reached Captain Reynolds' home in Beacon Hill. Water cascaded down the cobblestone streets, turning the historic neighborhood into a glistening maze. She'd borrowed a phone from a startled convenience store clerk to call for backup, but had been deliberately vague about the situation. If Keller was right about corruption in the department, she couldn't be sure who to trust. The front door of Reynolds' townhouse was ajar. Never a good sign. Drawing her backup weapon from her ankle holster, Sophia entered cautiously. "Captain? It's Alvarez." The house was silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. Sophia moved through the elegant foyer into the living room, where signs of a struggle were evident. An overturned chair, a broken vase, drops of blood on the hardwood floor. A noise from upstairs drew her attention. Gun raised, she ascended the staircase, careful to avoid the spots that might creak. The master bedroom door was closed. Sophia positioned herself to the side, turned the handle, and pushed it open in one swift motion. Captain Reynolds sat in an armchair, his hands bound to the arms, a gag in his mouth. Thomas Keller stood behind him, a knife held casually against the captain's throat, the same type of knife used in all the murders. "Right on time, Detective," Keller said, his voice eerily calm. "I was just explaining to the captain how long I've waited for this moment. Let him go, Keller. This isn't the way to get justice. Reynolds' eyes were wide, a mixture of fear and something else, shame perhaps. Isn't it? Keller applied slight pressure to the knife, drawing a thin line of blood. The system failed my sister. It failed all the victims. The men responsible were never held accountable. And killing them now makes it right. Sophia kept her gun trained on Keller, looking for an opening, any chance to take a shot without risking Reynolds' life. It's not about making it right. It's about balance, about consequences. Keller's eyes were feverish now, decades of rage finally finding its outlet. Ask him, detective. Ask him who really killed those women in 1982, including my sister. Sophia kept her gun steady. Is it true, Captain? Was there a cover-up? Reynolds couldn't speak through the gag, but the answer was written across his face, in the slump of his shoulders, the resignation in his eyes. The harbor killer was Martin Shelby, Keller said, his voice breaking slightly, son of Judge William Shelby, one of the most powerful men in Boston at the time. When evidence pointed to Martin, Judge Shelby made calls. Evidence disappeared, witnesses changed their stories, and a convenient John Doe was declared the killer. Sophia's mind was racing, trying to find a way to diffuse the situation. If what you're saying is true, there are proper channels. Proper channels. Keller's laugh was harsh. I've spent 20 years trying to get someone to listen, filed petitions to reopen the case, sent evidence to journalists who never called back, reached out to the FBI only to be redirected back to the same corrupt department. The system protects its own. Behind her, Sophia heard the sound of sirens approaching. Backup was getting close. You hear that, Keller? It's over. Let the captain go, and I promise I'll help you expose the truth, the right way. Something shifted in Keller's expression, a flicker of doubt. Why should I believe you? Because I know what it's like to live with guilt, Sophia said, lowering her gun slightly. Lisa Mendez haunts me every day. I can't change what happened to her, but I can make sure I never make the same mistake again. Justice matters to me, Keller. The truth matters. The sirens were louder now, just outside the house. Voices called from below as officers entered. It's too late, Keller said, pressing the knife harder against Reynolds' throat. They'll bury it again. They always do. Not this time, Sophia said firmly, because this time there's evidence they can't ignore. She reached slowly into her jacket pocket and pulled out her phone. Not her service phone that Keller had taken, but her personal phone that had been in her car when she was abducted. I've been recording since I entered the house, and I'm streaming it to a secure server. Whatever happens in this room, the truth gets out. It was a bluff. Her phone had been in her car, but it was enough to create a moment of uncertainty in Keller's eyes. That moment was all Sophia needed. She lunged forward, tackling Keller away from the captain, the knife clattering to the floor. They struggled briefly before Sophia gained the upper hand, pinning Keller face down, her knee in his back as she cuffed him. He didn't resist, almost seeming relieved that it was over. As officers flooded the room, Sophia met Reynolds' eyes as someone removed his gag. The unspoken question hung between them. It's true, Reynolds said quietly, his voice hoarse. All of it. God help me, it's true. In the days that followed, the case broke open like a festering wound. With Reynolds' confession and the evidence Keller had meticulously gathered over decades, the truth about the 1982 Harbor killer case finally came to light. Martin Shelby, the real killer, had died of natural causes in 2010, having lived a full life free of consequences. Judge Shelby had passed away years earlier, his reputation intact. Several retired officers were arrested, including James Hargrove, whose apparent obsession with the case had been an elaborate act designed to make him appear innocent of the cover-up. Donovan was cleared. His father had indeed been involved, but he himself had known nothing about it. Thomas Keller was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. Despite the circumstances, there was no legal justification for what he had done. Sophia testified at his trial, presenting the full truth about both the original murders and the cover-up, ensuring that at least in this case, history would not be erased. The Boston Police Department underwent a painful reckoning, with external investigators combing through decades of cases for other potential cover-ups. Reynolds cooperated fully, accepting that his career and freedom were over. For Sophia, the case represented both an end and a beginning. The department would never be the same, but perhaps it could be better, more accountable. She was appointed to lead a new cold case unit with a mandate to review unsolved cases without regard for political considerations or pressure from above. On her first day in her new role, she found a letter on her desk. It had been forwarded from the prison where Thomas Keller was serving his life sentence. "Detective Alvarez," it read. "Justice is never simple, is it? I don't regret what I did, but I'm grateful that the truth finally came to light. My sister can rest now, and perhaps someday I can too. The ghosts that haunt us define us, but they don't have to destroy us. Remember that. TK." Sophia placed the letter in her desk drawer. Keller was right about one thing. They were all haunted by ghosts of one kind or another. The difference was in how they chose to live with them. As she opened the first case file on her desk, a decades-old unsolved murder that deserved a fresh look, Sophia made a silent promise to both the victims of the past and those who might be spared in the future. The truth would not be buried again, not on her watch. The invisible killer who had terrorized Boston had finally been caught, but the real ghost, the long shadow of corruption and silence, would take much longer to exorcise. It was a fight Sophia was prepared to wage for the rest of her career, one cold case at a time.